So at some point, one is compelled to go beyond, as the Course suggests, discussions of theory and to really put into practice what one learns in daily life. Or put another way, as the Course says, to say I want the peace of God means nothing. To mean it is everything. So what exactly is the practice of the Course? How does one do the Course? Just for the sake of contrast, Zen Buddhism, for example, uses the tools of sitting zazen, calligraphy, martial arts, even eating together, and the whole point is to become without thought, to function as one with everything that one is surrounded by. So it's past the distraction of, in zazen in particular, it's past the distraction of thinking and the pain that arises in the body. So what's the practice of the Course? And we'll go over probably about a dozen tools that the Course provides. It's a map towards the same goal as probably Zen Buddhism, which is that state of just pure oneness with peace and singularity. For the Course, it's the practice of forgiveness, which, as we've talked about, is that unlearning what I've taught myself, a reorienting, a correction in my perception, a change in vantage point to really understand who I am, and I really actually move from a who I am to a what I am. So it's very much moving from the body, my body among many bodies, to a unifying mind, and then to the Christ, which is the extending of non-duality, the state of non-duality. And as I said, the Course is a map, and so the tools that we're provided with are instruments that we can use then to find ourselves on the map and arrive at our destination. So again, we'll go over about a dozen of those. What do we know from the Course? Probably the first thing is the ego thought system, and particularly with regards to specialness and the strategies that are employed. But the ego thought system is to, as we've talked about, is to take from nothing a sense of self that is special. And what does specialness entail? To have specialness, you have to have at least two components, the duality. To compare and contrast what is different, you have to have that element of distinction. So at the heart of specialness, there's really this experience of individuation, me from not me. And then from that distinction of separation, then I choose one of those elements as being special. So the experience of individuation for all of us is that we each experience ourselves to be in our body, to be this particular self, and everything else then is considered not oneself, and our orientation is from the self that we establish. So what we all share in common is that same feature. That's the experience of specialness, is to take one object in that duality and claim that to be me and the other not to be me. So this world certainly gives a great depiction of separation, of duality, countless numbers of objects, and upon those we apply meaning, value, significance, and develop a hierarchy. So that's what the Course teaches in terms of the ego thought system. And then, of course, as we've talked about before, I found myself, in contrast to the love and of the piece of non-duality that I reject, I found myself on this experience of guilt or shame, terror, whatever you want to call it, but it is a very unpleasant experience. So then becomes the quest of, do I let that go, which I've already decided not to, so then how do I deal with that? And that's where the ego strategies come into play. And another tool that is provided outside of the ego thought system and specialness, or part of that, is this whole notion of sin, guilt, and fear. As I said, I have this notion of shame that distinguishes me from love, and then I declare that preferable, special, and now my problem then becomes how to make that bearable. And sin, guilt, and fear, of course, implies that I believe myself to be the home of evil, darkness, and sin, and how do I escape that without returning to what I've already rejected. So the world and bodies are made to kind of dilute and ease the experience of shame and self-hatred. And we then try to get outside of our mind, the one singular mind, and dilute that and project it into the bodies and what becomes our world. So our very foundation of existence actually is founded on this notion of guilt, this notion of shame, this notion of sin, guilt, and fear. What another tool that the Course provides is that of cause and effect. That the cause lies with the mind, and in the mind the cause is the shame, and the effect is the blame. So in our relationships, that same feature takes place, where I take the shame and I blame you for it. And I do that simply because the world mirrors what the mind does, and I can't change that on the level of bodies, because bodies, again, are the projection, are the fantasy, are the attempt to rid the mind of that guilt, and we then do the same thing in our relationships. We tend to try and rid ourselves of the experience of guilt and shame and blame. Now that includes the flip side of that I establish, this makes me happy, that I rely on this for my comfort, and that I began to sort out in the world, this is what upsets me, this is what pleases me. And that's also the heart of specialness, is this experience of kind of supreme judge, that I get to dictate what is okay and what's not okay. And what we miss in the process is, because we look different, that form, for that very reason of contrast, everything looks different, and then again, we impose value upon that. We give it significance and meaning that it doesn't have, for the sake of feeling in power, in control, of being able to say, this pleases me, that doesn't please me, and that's the heart of our relationships. None of that can, of course, be changed on the level of this world, the level of identifying oneself as a person in the body, because that's not where it comes from. Again, when you look in a mirror, the mirror can't dictate to you who you are. The mirror doesn't change your self-image. You have to be the figure on the other side of the mirror to really facilitate any change. So that's the purpose of the world, is to be that mirror. So thereby, there's another tool that the Course gives us, is this really correction of cause and effect, that nothing in this world is causal, and it's simply effect, and the best that it can do is, understanding that it's a mirror, reveal the content of our mind, and help us then move from the body, the mindless state, to the mindfulness, which is the figure outside of the mirror. Part and parcel with that is understanding what form and content are. Again, form is this body, this chair, everything that we see in the world, which is just an expression of the idea of separation, an illustration, a depiction of just the multitude of what separation and difference can be demonstrated as. And then out of all of those differences in separation, I start to assign value, and that's what gives me the sense of specialness. So we need to understand the difference then between all the things that form are, that they're designed by nature, by design, to hide content. And the content, again, as we've already talked about, is the guilt, the shame, the fear, the terror, the horror in the mind. So the sad part is that all of our relationships are actually founded on that, and the whole attempt of the world is to ease and dilute that experience, but it certainly doesn't get rid of it, because the world doesn't have the power to get rid of it. The world only demonstrates what's in the mind. So understanding that as a tool is very helpful in the application of that to our daily lives. And in that way, I can really begin to understand that form is simply a tool. All the world does, all my body does, all my interactions do, all my daily rituals do, is demonstrate what is in my mind, or put in other words, this is what I value. I always have the experience that I want. And again, the content is the experience. The form is all the myriad of ways it gets acted out that we actually think make it all different. And that's the catch, is that the form form always looks different because it demonstrates the idea of separation and difference, but it's the value I give that form, that one is preferable or above the other, that begins to demonstrate how I try to dispel my guilt and my self-hatred onto, it's not my fault, it's caused by these things around me. So part and parcel with that is of the heart of that, and one of the tools is of course this notion of denial and projection, as we've talked about, the shame and blame, the self-hatred made into the hatred of you, and there again the notion of duality really serves that primary purpose. What we get into then are the whole, what the Course talks about is special love and special hate. It's actually all special hate because, again, the content of the mind that makes the world is that experience of shame and guilt and horror to distinguish itself from the piece of non-duality. But we don't see that, and so what we're occupied in the world is this incredible game of assigning special love and special hate. The key to those are that they're very specific, which goes against totality and singularity. So hate is specific, special love is specific. I love you over all these people, I love this about you, but I don't love that about you, I hate this. And so our entire life is comprised of these layers of special love, special hate, from temperature, fabric, taste. All of our senses are oriented to assisting us in that task of special love, special hate. Now the point is not to deny relationship, to deny that we're doing this, because again, it's just the product of the content of the mind. What I want to do is simply observe that content, that I have a relationship is made by guilt, and then the blame establishes the need for other. So what I'm really doing is using you to kind of be the Sherpa for my guilt, that I need you to carry the self-hatred that I can't hold on to for myself. So that's looking at relationships in the positive sense, that when I look at anything and anybody, and again, the hierarchy that we put upon this, that there are people that we attest to loving, or at least certain parts of them on certain days, on certain moments, and then all the way to what are some of the figures in our world today. In the past it was Hitler, currently it's like ISIS and terrorism. We can't imagine that in the form of a parent abusing a child, that somehow there is a part of me that is actually being expressed in that, and that's the whole purpose of separating that out into different bodies and different forms, so that terror that I experience, the content of that form, the horror of enslaving another person, of abusing another person, I don't have to own that. I can look at a TV and watch somebody being beheaded and be horrified, and certainly attest to that I wouldn't do that. That's no part of who I am. And yet what the Course is teaching is that the very nature of it is that that's what I've separated off and put upon what is now what the Course would call my brother, the disowned part of myself. So the whole point, again, in these tools is having them, I can begin to re-teach myself, unlearn what I've taught myself, and that's the whole point of the idea of forgiveness. Part and parcel with that, again, is this notion of victim and victimizer. That in that split, in that taking the guilt and splitting it into the experience of fear and the guilty party, and then projecting that out into a world of form, what I will always see is myself as a victim. And if we can get in touch then, part of the practice then is to really look at how does that play out in my day-to-day world. And again, if we can even capture 10% of that or 1% of that, we'd be doing a good job. But the fact of the matter is that it's 100% of our daily activity, is that I'm constantly navigating through my body, which was designed to do this, is to gauge temperature, dryness in my mouth, how much air am I breathing, how is my heart beating, and those are things that aren't even in our awareness until something goes radically wrong with those elements, but I'm looking at what time is it, what do I need to be doing now, what are the positive things that I should be doing, what are the negative things that should be doing. So our entire 24/7 is occupied in that kind of trying to determine this experience that I have, how to make it better, how to prevent myself from feeling the awfulness of it. So part of the formula in our world is I'm upset because of, or the flip side of that is I'm happy because of, I'm pleased because of, although that, what it's saying on some level is I rely upon this for my comfort, and without that, then what would be laid bare is my discomfort. There's always this notion that something will take away or keep from me the things that I need for comfort, whether it's water, oxygen, health, shelter, employment, money, food, positive reactions from people. All of these things just become a part of our norm, and that's the state of mindlessness, is that we really are paying attention to the form and not the content, and not the strategy that's being employed in all this. We don't realize too that it's a kill or be killed world. Actually, it eventually goes to kill and be killed at some point, everything. So there's this whole death theme. And again, the form demonstrates it. Where it comes from is the idea that my identity is built on the death of truth, the death of non-duality, the death of that peace, that love. And so everything, because I have that notion and the guilt stems from my having killed off that truth, everything then in the world reflects that hope for life, hope for a special me, and then seeing it wither into this death, because that's the concept that occupies my mind. And then of course we can spend enormous amounts of time and energy trying to strategize on how to make life better, if not prolong it. We don't even realize the extent to which we do that, and not that we need to, but for example, we take in water and take out of it what we need, and expel from our body what we don't want. We breathe in oxygen and change that molecular structure, and then breathe out carbon dioxide. We cannibalize everything. Psychologically, I take you, and I'm not even so interested in the truth of who you are. I'm interested in the version of you that fits into my scheme of things. So again, it's when we really strip away the surface, it's not the pretty picture that we're trying to paint. And another one of the tools then is this idea of mind and projection of thought into form, of cause and effect. And so that's where the depictions, the metaphors of a dreamer and a dream with dream characters, a puppeteer and puppets, the child and its toys and its dolls, animating those. All of these become very helpful learning tools, visual aids. So those are also tools the Course provides. To understand too that in the lessons, which are particularly designed for mind training, that we begin with the very early lessons, really trying to help us understand that there is no meaning, there is no significance, there is no importance, but what I give it. We teach ourselves, we demonstrate to ourselves that we think that everything has value in and of itself, and that part of becoming an adult is to really understand what the inherent value is in something, when that is just really the flip side of what we're really doing, which is assigning everything the meaning and value that it gives. And it's frightening to start to take that apart, because then we are kind of laid bare with there is no meaning, there is no significance, there is no importance, including that of myself. And so we resist that very much. So when I began to realize that it's literally all of my making, there's both a horror and a relief in that. The horror is that it's not what I thought it was, that it is really all in my head, or because it's all in my head, again, that's just the form depiction of it's all in my mind. And in my head, in my brain, it's much more complex, and where in the mind it's just a very simple thought of guilt and fear and then trying to deal with that. So again, the basic tool of the Course is this notion of forgiveness, of unlearning, of going from a point of mindlessness, which is the body, which is being in this world, which is thinking that the mirror images are what's real rather than the thing outside of the mirror. So in helping myself move from that vantage point to this vantage point and then eventually to truth, that's what the miracle is. It's the corrected understanding. So how do I apply this all? I mean, we've just gone through probably a dozen, and there's certainly more tools in the Course. So how do we then go from understanding these concepts to applying them? And one of the kind of demonstrations that we're given, of course, is the life of Jesus. And it's not so much what Jesus did, but what did he know. And Jesus perceived Jesus, the figure, the person, the man in the world. He was able to kind of let that go and stand at the point of Jesus, the mind. And the demonstration is that just as he did that, we are also able to do that. There's this interesting line in the Course where he talks about, at some point you have to forgive me. And again, re-understanding what relearning what forgiveness means. What that means is that I can no longer think that Jesus is separate from me, that what we're unlearning is the idea of separation, so that when I hold anybody, whether it's myself, my spouse, my coworkers, the person in front of me at the grocery line or in the car next to me in traffic, that all of those separations are imagined for the purpose of maintaining a sense of individuation and specialness and significance and importance of my storytelling, and unlearning that those don't exist and that it all comes from this singularity, and so that's the focal point of forgiveness and the proper use of relationship. So Jesus knew this. He was seeing things, he was understanding things from the level of not the body that was had nails driven to it and put on a cross, but he was watching that from the author point of view, the dreamer point of view, the puppeteer, and understanding that the whole scenario was not only made up, but that he wasn't just Jesus, he was every component of that, because it was his story, his dream as the dreamer. And so the invitation is that we can do that also if we'd like to, and not maintain our separation, our duality from him. It's interesting too to go back and read some of the biblical stories, and for myself, the way that I was raised to read them, and now go back and see them from a different vantage point. The whole prodigal son story changes, the temptations of Jesus, the three temptations are really just kind of surveying what the ego thought system offers and being able to say, I'm not really interested in that. So it's fascinating to look at that. But so Jesus understood what he knew was the singular totality of the world as a projection of the mind, and so then he wasn't afraid of that and able to let it go, and all he experienced was the remembering of peace and truth. So again, the daily practice of this, if I'm not already garbled it up, using my own life, for example, the primary story for the early part of my life was my adoption. And that's kind of a personalized story of victimization. There's obviously separation, rejection, and abandonment, this feeling of oscillating between I or they must be awful, and certainly this notion of I didn't do this, I didn't ask for this, I didn't ask to be born, I didn't ask for this life, which is just, again, this disownment. And so I raised myself on that and was very serious about it and very pained by it. But you know that all stories are like that. It's the form changes and the characters and time and place change, but it's the same content. It's the same experience of disownment, of fear and hurt and pain at the hands of others. And what it's really about is the whole rejection. So as an adult, and particularly as I became a student of the Course, what I began to do was be able to reframe that and strip it of its specialness and look at the content rather than the form. And the content is that this notion of that I've rejected love, and yet at the same time I somehow declare that the horror that comes out of that was propagated on me, that I didn't choose that for myself. So there's an example of kind of using the concepts of the Course and relearning, reteaching, re-understanding, looking at things differently. Now the story doesn't change, but certainly my appreciation, my use of it changes drastically, and therefore my experience has changed radically. So what it also entails